Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, NBA reporter for Buha's Block, and welcome to another episode. On today's show, we're going to be doing part 2 of our 2-part mailbag, finishing off the questions from last week. I'm still here in Las Vegas, as you guys can see from the hotel background. All right, let's get into the mailbag here. First question from Pan_VL. Hi, Jovan. Greetings from Eastern Europe. Love your show and really appreciate your honesty about the team's shortcomings. In my opinion, Lakers fans tend to be a little delusional sometimes and need some grounding anyways, smiley face. How do you evaluate the Lakers' chances of actually being a legit title contender in the next few years? Do you think this front office is going to be capable of recognizing two-way talent long-term? Some Caruso-Zubac scale PTSD here, and eventually be able to surround Luka with enough complementing players. I appreciate the compliment. Shout out to all my brates in Eastern Europe. I will note that most of the Laker fans who watch this show and listen to this show, I would say, are not delusional. There are, of course, some exceptions, but I think for the most part, the Late Night Gang has a pretty good read on this team and where they're currently at. So I just wanted to state that before we get into it. But in terms of the Lakers' ability to contend for the next few years, I am high on that ability, if only because they have Luka Doncic, who to me is at worst the top 4 player in the league, and he has the upside to be the best player in the league. And this actually brings up the NBA Future Power Rankings from ESPN, and they had the Lakers 8th, which I felt was a little low. Looking at the list, they had OKC number 1, which I agree with. Houston at number 2 is interesting. They're not a team I would have thought would have been at number 2. I certainly in the top 5. I thought 2 was like a little high, but Houston with Şengün, Amen Thompson got KD for the next couple years. And to take a step back for a second, the Future Power Rankings are looking at the next 3 years. So it is in that few year window that you were referencing. So that's why I think there is a clear analog here with just how this applies to where the Lakers are at. So Houston, I get because of Şengün, Thompson, Durant, and they got a lot of picks, and they can still make another move with some of their young guys plus some of their picks. Knicks at 3, Cavs at 4. I think those are 2 teams that should be elite in the East for the foreseeable future. Clippers at 5 and Warriors at 6. I disagree with. I think the Lakers are in a better spot than either one of those teams moving forward. Luka is just better than anyone on the Clippers or the Warriors, and those teams are 2 of the older teams in the league. There's a lot of uncertainty, I would say, with the Clippers and Warriors. So I vehemently disagree with the Clippers and Warriors being ranked ahead of the Lakers. The Magic are at 7, and I do like Orlando, and I see the upside with them, and I think I would not be surprised if even this season, but potentially next season or the following season, like they are in that mix with Cleveland and New York in terms of the top of the East and having a real shot to get out. I just wouldn't put them ahead of the Lakers because as much as I like Paolo, I think there's still another level or even 2 that he needs to go to be a top 10 guy, a clear guy you could win a championship with as your best player. I don't think he has shown that yet. I think he has the upside to do that, to be clear. So I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying comparing like Paolo, Franz, Desmond Bane, I like that trio. Jalen Suggs, I like him as well. But I still like you need that top end player that the Lakers already have in Luka, and they also have the flexibility with the cap space moving forward to rearrange the roster around him. Denver at 9 is interesting because this is a matter of, are they able to keep this core together with some of the apron stuff? How does Jokic age? I think he's going to age really well, but can he be the best player in the league or at least the top 5 player for the next few years? I think he can. And then we get to San Antonio, Minnesota, and these are the 2 teams that I actually think have a better argument to be ahead of the Lakers and more in that Clippers, Golden State, Orlando mix. With Minnesota, you have Ant, you have Julius Randle, you have Jaden McDaniels. I like Dante DiVincenzo as either like a 5th starter or key bench type player. I think Minnesota should be more in that top 7, top 8 mix. And San Antonio with Wemby, Harper, Castle, De'Aaron Fox. I really like Carter Bryant. I've been really impressed with his defense. they're also a team that can make a bigger move with their draft capital. And so the only teams I would put ahead of the Lakers right now would be OKC, Houston, New York, Cleveland, San Antonio, and Minnesota. So I would actually bump the Lakers up to 7th in this list. And that's without knowing who Luka's next co-star is going to be. Because if they nail that, then the Lakers could ascend into the top 5, top 3. It's going to be tough to get up to the OKC level. And I think Houston and San Antonio are both pretty well positioned. But could they get in that New York, Cleveland, Minnesota mix? I think so. As for the rest of your question here, in terms of my confidence of the Lakers identifying two-way talent and the right pieces to surround with Luka, it is a concern. It is, to me, something that I've talked about this many times before, but it has been a blind spot for this front office and this organization going on multiple years now. It never made sense the way that they dismantled the 2019-20 team, then the 2020-21 team, and then have just not been able to find two-way type wings of guys who can at least be like league average shooters and really good defenders. I think that's the type of player you want. You want multiple of those guys around Luka. The closest they've maybe gotten was Max Christie, and they ended up having to trade him in the Luka trade. So that's been an issue for this group. I will say that if you want to be an optimist on the situation, for me, the 2025 offseason was their best offseason since the 2019 offseason. So that's looking at like their best offseason in a half decade with, of course, the Luka extension, but also the Ayton buyout, the Smart buyout, the Laravia signing, trading up for Adu Thero in the second round, who is dealing with the knee stuff. But I liked the process, at least, of being aggressive in the second round and getting that type of player. You could argue it's a relatively low bar to clear some of the previous off seasons, and it's better than the Russ off season, and it's better than some of the off seasons where they just didn't do anything. But I would say they are trending in the right direction in even some of the players they signed. Like a Jake Laravia type is not the prototypical Lakers free agent signing, right? They do go for more name brand role player types or guys with a certain pedigree or a certain status. And Jake Laravia does not match that. He does have the ties with the same representation as Austin Reaves, but I think the Laravia signing and even Smart to some degree, because he's not been like, they have tended to prioritize offensive guards rather than defensive guards or perimeter players. I think the Smart and Laravia signings don't necessarily align with some of the Lakers' previous moves and the types of players or skill sets they have previously prioritized. And so I think that's a step in the right direction. I would like to see them make a move during the season and fill out the roster properly next offseason to give you a better answer here in terms of my confidence level or my belief in their ability to fill this out properly. With that said, Luka had a part in the recruiting and identifying some of the talent, even going back to the Mark Williams situation with the players that he was interested in. So if Luka is having a say here and he is able to identify the types of players that he likes and that he thinks can complement his skill set, and the Lakers are open to that and willing to go out and get those types of players, I think that's a way that this partnership can work and they can find the right pieces around him. But so macro sense, I am bullish on the Lakers' ability to contend over the next few years. But in terms of the Dallas build of athletic rim running bigs who could also protect the rim, or big wings who are could play both sides of the ball effectively, I'm less confident in that, but I think this offseason was a step in the right direction. So I'm open to them proving me wrong, or maybe at least being more successful in identifying some of those guys. But we have a track record of 4 or 5 years of their failure to either identify or acquire that type of player, right? Because you can identify that type of player, but can you go get that player? Can you go draft them? Can you trade for them? Can you sign them? They have not been able to do that. So I do have some real skepticism about that. But big picture, you have Luka, you're going to contend. Next question from Sam Jacobson 9256. A few episodes ago, you mentioned that Rui could be a rotation guy / starter at several top end teams who have enough rebounding and defense at the 3 and the 5. My question is, who are some realistic players that could be targets? Obviously, a good point of attack defender / floor spacer is ideal, but who are players that fit that criteria, are starting caliber, and teams would be willing to trade to get Rui? It's a good question, Sam, and it has me stumped a little bit because I don't. So the examples I've made are looking at OKC and Minnesota. I think those are two teams with the ideal build for Rui, where you could slot him at the 4 in between an elite defensive center and an elite defensive wing. With OKC, it's either Chet or Hartenstein at the 5, Rui at the 4, J-Dub at the 3. With Minnesota, it's Rudy Gobert at the 5, Rui at the 4, Jaden McDaniels at the 3. And so you're putting him next to two elite defensive front court players who are also good rebounders. And that protects Rui's strengths, where if Rui's the worst front court defender and has to take the third option in there, and then also is surrounded by good rebounding, I think that's the way to set Rui up for success. And then offensively can be a catch and shoot spot up guy, a cutter, can maybe get some post ups, deep seals against mismatches if it's a particularly big starting group where it's going to be hard to match up with him. The issue is this is more of a theoretical argument or debate or analysis rather than the reality of the situation, because OKC is not trading for Rui. Minnesota is not trading for Rui. This was more of me trying to give examples of, I think Rui can be a starter in a particular build, but the Lakers don't have that build because their version of that build is, I guess, Rui next to Ayton and LeBron or Ayton and Luka, if we're looking toward the future. And that is not, to me, like the rebounding is actually there with Ayton and Luka or Ayton and LeBron. So they do cover Rui in that perspective, but the defense is not. Ayton is not in the same class as Chet or Hartenstein or Gobert defensively. And Luka is certainly not in the class of J-Dub or Jaden McDaniels, but I would argue LeBron is not in the same class as those guys as well. This was more me looking at the argument for Rui to come off the bench is just that offensively, I think it's a really good fit in the shooting and the cutting, the ability to get out in transition. That fits with Luka and Austin and LeBron. The issue is the defensive end. And I just don't think the Lakers have the ideal build or even close to the ideal build for Rui to properly function on the defensive side in a role that would be ideal to him. I think we have to get into more realistically play-in level teams or lottery teams, at least in the West. In the East, even then, I don't see him. Like, I think he's more of a play-in, like lottery type guy. And that's where I go back to the potential trades for Andrew Wiggins or Dillon Brooks. And with both guys, I expect Miami to be a play-in team in the East. And maybe they just decide to rip the Band-Aid off and go in a different direction, or they just view Rui as a similar level player. I think below Wiggins, but if you get some draft capital or some additional assets in that, and just getting off the Wiggins contract in terms of the additional years, maybe that's appealing enough for Miami closer to the trade deadline. And then with Phoenix and Dillon Brooks, if Phoenix is a play-in or worse team this season, do they just say, what's the most we could get for Dillon Brooks? And can we get off this contract? And can we get an asset? So I think both of those players are better than Rui, fit specifically better than Rui defensively on this team. And I think those guys combined with Jared Vanderbilt and Marcus Smart make a formidable perimeter trio defensively. And I don't know how many minutes those three would play together necessarily, but you could build a rotation where you often have at least two of those three on the floor together. That's a path to me for this group to at least be average, if not slightly above average defensively. I have no grand illusions of them being like a top 10 defense or anything, but I think having a Brooks or a Wiggins could be the difference between like the 12th or 13th best defense versus the 19th or 20th best defense. I think there could be that big of a swing going from Rui playing 28, 30, 32 minutes to one of those guys playing 28, 30, 32 minutes. I think there is a dramatic swing on the defensive end. So I don't see players or fits that make more sense than those two. I think those remain the two fake trades that I like the most. Next question, we have a couple here. First one from Connor Phillips. Are there any potential trades you know of involving Dalton last season that you believe the Lakers would have accepted if they knew what Dalton's trade value would be going into the season? Unless he has a hot stretch to rehab his value, it seems like they mishandled him as an asset. And then Ryan Rich, 2776. Do you think Dalton Knecht will regain some of his value this season? There's a low-hanging fruit answer here, Connor, with a potential trade that did go through that then got rescinded in the Mark Williams trade. I've reported this before. The Lakers offered that package to several teams, and a couple of the guys they were trying to acquire were Walker Kessler and Jalen Duren. So they did float this general package of Dalton plus a first plus a pick swap for other young centers, and it was not enough for some of those other players. And then they got down to Mark Williams, and it ended up being enough. And then they rescinded it after the physical and medicals came back. So I don't have any other trades other than the ones that I know they offered in terms of the young centers that they felt could be the center of the future next to Luka. Between your, like, the ending of the question and Ryan's question, I agree that the Lakers are in a tough spot right now with the Dalton situation. There has been little to be encouraged by based on his preseason. I was talking to a scout last night at the Lakers Mavericks preseason game, a scout for another team, and he was just talking about Dalton's struggles and how, especially from a decision-making processing standpoint, there's not been a lot of progress there, and that continues to be the area of his game where he's just not seeing the right thing to do on either side of the ball. Of course, he's more evolved on the offensive side, but this person was expressing a lot of skepticism. And that's just one person's opinion, but I've said this before. Anytime I have an outside conversation about Dalton with someone outside of the Lakers, it tends to be relatively negative or pessimistic. And between his age at 24, his shooting struggles, going back to Summer League and now the preseason, he's shooting 23% between the California Classic, Las Vegas Summer League, and the preseason. And it's a sample size of about 70 shots at this point. So that this has been going back through the summer here. The prolonged shooting struggles and the defensive struggles, again, like it's not great right now. So I think he does have an opportunity here as the 10th man in the LeBron-less rotation to rehab his value if he can become a more reliable catch and shoot guy and continue to improve a little bit defensively against second unit lineups. I don't anticipate him being more than like a 10 to 12 minute a night guy, probably a 2-shift guy at this stage of his career. I think the concern, I said this last night on my Lakers Mavericks post-game reaction. The biggest thing for me, like, the defense is what it is, and it is a real limiting factor, but the floor as a shooter has been lower than it should be for someone who is as good of a shooter or as great of a shooter as he's supposed to be. And I think the up and down nature of his shot going back to last season, but then also the struggles he's had in Summer League and the preseason, it's like, I just don't think the caliber of shooter that the Lakers have built him as, they don't have stretches like that. And I think he's more of a good shooter than a great shooter. And a good shooter can still be valuable, but you need to be contributing more in other ways. And some of the rebounding, some of the playmaking, I think there's been some progress there, but I don't think it's quite at the level where you're not playing Dalton for his rebounding or for his playmaking necessarily. And because of the defensive concerns and how you have to hide him and how teams, the jury's out, the scouting report is out, teams will relentlessly target him in pick and roll actions. Because of that, they've also scouted his drives and forcing him left. Because of that, I just think, like, he's really got to have an elite skill out there to warrant playing him more, and he just doesn't have that right now. So to be honest, I am skeptical that he's going to rehab his value. I think it can go from being a negative to maybe a slightly negative, or maybe in the best case scenario, more of a neutral value. I don't see right now with what we've seen going back to Summer League and this preseason, him getting back to being a positive value. So I think he might just end up being a throw-in in a trade if the Lakers make a trade at some point this season. And it has been quite the fall off from last year, but this has just been the way things are trending. And I never want to write a guy off, so I'm not entirely writing off Dalton, and I do want to leave some room for him to grow. And he is entering his second season, so I think it would be foolish, honestly, to completely write him off. But all we have to go off of is what we've seen, and there has been a lot more negative than positive going back to Summer League and now the preseason, and a lot of concerning aspects and lack of progress to his game. So the Lakers are going to give him opportunities to rehab that value, but it's on him to figure it out and to play better, and I'm not sure if that's going to happen. Next question from @JR Do you truly believe Wiggins would improve their defense enough to put them into the top tier with Denver and OKC? Even teams like Golden State and Minnesota look faster and more cohesive. I don't think he would. Help me see it, or do you agree? In parentheses, Vando looking healthy helps. Second quick one, is there any type of player that you would trade Austin Reaves for straight up, 1-for-1, that could be legit for both teams? This is a tough question, and because of that, I like it. I just referenced, I think Wiggins can be the difference between, if we assume that at full strength, Rui is the fifth starter, which right now is my assumption. If you replace him with Wiggins and he's playing 30, 32, 33, whatever minutes per night, I do think a larger sample size and more lineups with Wiggins in it compared to Rui can be the difference between the Lakers being the 13th best defense versus the 19th best defense. I do think there's a big enough gap there. I think there's a gap there between them offensively too. And the Lakers don't need that, to be clear, with having Luka, LeBron, and Austin, and Wiggins as a fourth guy, or maybe even Ayton as the fourth guy, whatever. But he has that upside. And then clearly defensively, I think he's a better, quicker, more athletic, has more of a proven track record, has done it in the playoffs before at a high level, won a championship doing it at a high level, as Golden State's wing stopper / sometimes point of attack guy. And so he's not that same player necessarily that was a few years ago, but I think there's a higher ceiling there. And to me, looking at the Lakers options, if it's Wiggins as the fifth guy versus Rui or Vando or Smart, I just think he's a better player overall than all three of those guys, but also more of a two-way player. So it's like if you're playing Vando, I think Vando's defensive ceiling is higher than Wiggins, but you are taking a big hit offensively. With Smart, we don't yet have enough of a sample size. We've only seen him play in one preseason game as of this recording, but certainly not the offensive player that Wiggins is. Defensively, could be a better player, but he's a guy who's dealt with injuries, is in his early 30s now. So I think it's close there between those two. I probably give Smart the edge in theory, and I think some of the defensive metrics would give Smart the edge, but that one might be close. And then with Rui, I think Wiggins is just straight up better than him on both sides of the ball. Now, Rui is a better shooter and cutter, so that specifically fits maybe better, and that would be the Rui counterpoint. But even then, Wiggins is a better defender, so I just think he presents a better two-way balance to the lineups. I've talked about the Lakers having top 5 offensive potential this season. Wiggins can fit in those lineups, but then he also can give them a higher ceiling, in my opinion, defensively, next to Ayton and LeBron and Luka and Austin. So I've said if the Lakers make the right move, I think they could get into that top tier with Denver and OKC. To me, Wiggins would be that right move. Ideally, you could keep Rui and have Rui coming off the bench, and you find a way to do it with some combination of Gabe, Maxey, and Dalton Knecht, but that will be tricky to do. And I think that the finances don't exactly line up there. I would still put, if they did the Wiggins trade, I would still put Denver and OKC ahead of them, but it could be a situation where they're in the same tier, or maybe it's more of those guys are tier 1A, Lakers are tier 1B, something like that. But there's also other variables that have to hit, right? Like LeBron has to get healthy and look like LeBron. I think Ayton has to show he can maintain a certain level of manning the defense for a sustained period. Smart has to look more like Smart. I think when we're talking about putting them in that OKC Denver tier, it's also assuming some of the other variables hit. I don't think it's just as black and white as they make the Wiggins trade and they're automatically there. That's also assuming Gabe and Vando continue to look like Gabe and Vando have looked in the preseason. They could stay healthy. Smart bounces back and can stay healthy. And so those are some variables that we can't predict. And if anything, you could even have some skepticism about, right? But I think Wiggins gives them a better two-way balance and raises both their floor and their ceiling on both sides of the ball. And then the second one, there isn't necessarily a player off the top of my head that I think I would trade Austin for straight up. An interesting one to me is Trey Murphy. And because he's a bit bigger, 6'7", 6'8", he's a better shooter. I think is not quite the defender, like because of his build and his size. I think people or some people, when they talk about him, project this, kind of wish cast this level of defense on him that I don't think he quite has. But I think it's harder to pick on him than Austin. So I could see Trey Murphy being a guy who fits really well next to Luka long term. I would assume that, and I've talked about this before, that both LA and New Orleans would think they have the better player and demand an asset out of the other one to make it more even. And there would be a bit of a standoff or like a stalemate there between that. But Trey Murphy is maybe the guy that's the closest to Austin that I think is an interesting pivot for both teams, where you're putting a elite shooter and burgeoning offensive talent, slash scorer in Murphy around Luka, but also a guy with more size and athleticism than Austin. And then with Austin, you are now putting him in New Orleans as the lead ball handler there, but a guy who I think fits really well next to Herb Jones and could also have some interesting pick and roll chemistry with Zion. You got to figure out what to do with Jordan Poole in that case, but yeah, I think that's the one that maybe comes closest. Otherwise, there's like Derek White, who, but if I'm Boston, I don't think I'm doing that. Trey Murphy is the most interesting one to me, though. For the record, I am more on the Austin side. I think right now he is a better player. Next question from Kurt Affair. With Ayton and drop, does the coaching staff prioritize the pressure of Marcus Smart on the ball handler or the weak side recovery of Jared Vanderbilt to prevent the nail defender from having to slide over? We're getting into some X's and O's here. I like it. The priority first and foremost is for the point of attack guy, the guy defending the ball handler, to navigate the screen, and depending on if they're going under or over, depends on the player, either to rear view contest or to go under, but then to slither around the screen and recover. So it starts first and foremost with the two guys directly in the play. And the Lakers are trying to, like JJ talked about with Spectrum, that he regretted putting two on the ball against Ant in Minnesota in the first round series last season. And so that to me informed, like, he wants to be careful with doubling and trapping and forcing the Lakers to be in 4-on-3 situations, forcing them to be in rotation and putting them at a disadvantage because they are not they don't have the defensive personnel to succeed or thrive. There are some teams with the athleticism and the defensive talent to be able to be in a disadvantage and still at least hold their own, if not even thrive. The Lakers are not that type of defense. So it starts first and foremost with Ayton, and if we're using Smart here as the example, those two guys doing their job of potentially switching, which it seems like the Lakers are going to be more open to depending on the matchup. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit later with the veer line that JJ talked about, where guys are switching at certain spots on the floor. So there is a situation in which it makes sense for Ayton to catch the defender on the drive and switch onto them until at least Smart can recover, if not just keep the switch momentarily if the guy's like going downhill. But first and foremost, it has to be Smart navigating the screen either from behind or going under and sticking with the ball handler. And Ayton also reading the situation, whether he needs to help, whether he needs to switch. And also, if it's a pick and pop big, being cognizant of that guy popping out potentially to a distance that's hard for Ayton to recover to, and being ready to make that rotation and contest. So I think that's the most important part of the Lakers drop coverage has got to be the two people directly involved in the action. You want to keep it 2-on-2 to prevent an advantage for the offense. Now, if there is breakdowns, and we've seen plenty of them in the preseason, not necessarily with Smart and Ayton directly because they've only played in one game together, but the Lakers pick and roll defense, I would argue, has not been very good overall. And there's been plenty of cracks in it. In that case, it is on the low man to make that rotation over. And then you need the nail guy or the guy, whoever's kind of around the wing elbow area to slide down. And because you got to be careful of like a back cut, either for a dunk or a layup or an offensive rebound, or also the kick to the corner for a wide open corner three. So that is I would say it has to be Marcus Smart first, doing his job, navigating the screen, not dying on the screen, not misreading the screen. DeAndre Ayton also reading the action properly and making the correct decisions. And then if there is a breakdown with that, then it's on Vanderbilt or the low man in this scenario to come up and help. You want to be careful if you're the guy who's one pass away. Like we're assuming here, let's just say for argument's sake, they're in the middle of the floor, like slightly on like the left side of the floor. And there's two corner shooters and then a guy on the weak side wing. In that case, the guy on the strong side, let's just say it's Austin, you want to be careful about overhelping there because then you're one pass away for an easy kick out to the corner. And then if Vando's the low man, that's the guy who has to make that rotation. And then if it's Rui or Luka, then that guy has to slide down and be kind of able to close out to honestly two players and be aware of what's happening there. So I think it has to start with the two guys in the action, and then from there, Lakers get into rotation and everybody has their jobs. So hope that answered your question, and would love if you have any follow-ups to hit me up about that. Next question from Angelo Torres. What has been some of the most entertaining, fun, or stressful stretches of the regular season you've covered the past couple of years? Any day covering the Lakers is a privilege. It is also entertaining and fun and stressful. You never know what to expect. The Russ trade, the Vogel firing, the Darvin firing, the JJ hiring, the Dan Hurley situation, the Luka trade. We could go through the list of all the crazy things that have happened just in the last few years since I've been covering the team since 2020. Like it's been a wild ride covering the Lakers, and I would have it no other way, but it is a combination of entertaining, fun, and stressful. So to look at the last couple of years, entertaining, I would say entertaining and fun, I'll combine a little bit here and say, first and foremost, like the Luka trade and the aftermath of that and him making his debut and some of those early games, the first game against Dallas, the first game in Denver, where that was the Luka breakout game where he started trash talking the crowd and having, as JJ said, a blackout episode. And that was a statement win for the Lakers. And it felt like Luka's arrival as a Laker. But they had so many statement wins over the course of last season with Minnesota and the Clippers and OKC and Indiana. And they had this like really that stretch of, I would say like mid-January into like mid-March, that 2-month stretch where they went 20-4, league's best defense. That was the most entertaining and fun stretch of the last couple of years for me, and the highest level basketball I think the Lakers have played in a regular season in quite some time. And then you also add in the Luka trade and just the novelty with that. And that is certainly one of my favorite stretches of Lakers basketball I've ever covered. In terms of stressful, I would say any time there's a trade or around the trade deadline, there's always a level of stress. Like the Mark Williams situation was a bit stressful. The Luka situation was fun and entertaining, but it was a stressful night, just first trying to confirm it, then trying to get as much intel and information about it. I had to write like 3 stories and also go live. And I also had a flight in the morning. So I pulled an all-nighter. It was just a crazy night. I was also trying to get a taxi at midnight in New York on a Saturday night, which in theory, with how many taxis are there, like should have been easier, but I could not get a taxi for the life of me. And so that was a bit of a stressful situation, but like we're not covering war or politics or anything that is like really stressful. Like we are, as some have said, like the toy department of news and journalism and whatnot. So I would say stressful stuff is like the playoffs and anytime it's like the trade deadline or around moves. If you want to ask like the least fun team I've covered or stretch I've covered, it's got to be the Russ era, and more specifically, I mean that first year was a mess and they didn't even make the play in, but the second, Darvin's first year, like the first half of that with Russ and Pat Bev, it was just not a fun team to cover. And remember, they were 13th in the West when they made the Russ trade, and then they made that surge to go to 7th. I would also say along those lines, like the final quarter to third of Lakers seasons the last few years have been fun because the team has had this sense of urgency. Like really the first half of Lakers seasons, the first like 40, 50 games tend to be a little disappointing, at least based on the last few years. And then they go on these runs over the final 20, 30 games to make a playoff push and have this sense of urgency. Things click in, and then we see the best version of them going into the playoffs. So that's been fun. But maybe LeBron, like there's things that come to mind, like LeBron breaking the scoring record, the in-season tournament was a fun stretch to cover. DFS trade, like there's a lot of fun and entertaining things, and games that come to mind, right? Like the Sacramento game at the beginning of last season where LeBron just went absolutely supernova in the fourth quarter and was hitting all those threes, and I forgot, he scored like 18, 20 points in the fourth, something crazy like that. Dalton's 37-point game against Utah, Austin's game against Indiana, also the Denver game. They lost that game in Denver, but Austin and Dalton both went off. Luka in Dallas was maybe my favorite game I covered last season, and the return and the emotion and just him then ripping their hearts out. As the fans already did have their hearts, but Luka dug in and he ripped their lungs out. I don't know. But yeah, those are some of the most fun and entertaining and stressful stretches of Lakers basketball over the last few years. Next question's from Angelo Torres again and Osh3H848. First from Angelo, Yo Jovan, could you explain a bit further that line for switching in drop coverage? I didn't really understand it the first time, and I'm very curious. And then from Oz, hey Jovan, I wanted to know if you could explain the line added to the Lakers practice courts a little bit more. Love the show. Appreciate that. Appreciate the support and the compliment. So those lines are, JJ called it a veer line, and depending on your definition, it could be a veer line, it could be a peel switch line, it could be a late switch line. There's different terminology depending on how you want to frame some of these things. For our purposes, we might just call it a late switch line. So the point of that arc inside the 3-point arc is when the Lakers are in their switching groups, whether it's 1 through 3, 1 through 4, 1 through 5, and even sometimes in the drop coverage with let's say, to go back to a previous example, Smart and Ayton, that is the line that you need to be picking up the switch at the latest. In like that's the last line of this needs to be the switch. So I think it's more of a visual cue for them to realize that like we cannot not switch by this point on the floor, right? Because if anything, you want to even keep it outside of the 3-point arc and just keep them as close to the half court line or the sidelines as possible. But that's the visual cue for them to be like, if I'm the guy, if there's a 2-man action or 3-man action and I'm making a decision here, like this is the spot where I need to switch over. And so with drop coverage, I think we are going to see some situations in which Ayton switches, like it's not their preference for 8 and 2 switch, but there will be scenarios, especially if he's playing more up to touch or it is a certain level of shooter like a Steph opening night. He's got to be up on him. And there will be scenarios where maybe if Steph gets a step and he's not looking to shoot, Ayton's got to be able to switch onto him there. And so my understanding is it's more of a visual cue for like, this is the zone, this is the area we need to be veer switching, peel switching, late switching. There are slight nuances within it. Like a peel switch is a help defender switching onto a ball handler. A veer switch is more the two guys directly in the action. That drop guy will take the ball handler and then the other guy will veer back to, you could call it veer, you could call it peel, whatever, back to, let's say like a pick and pop guy. But the overall point is they're using that as a visual cue for guys to either, if you're the help defender, switch on, or if you're the drop big, switch on in that zone. And you don't want guys switching any lower. If anything, you ideally want them switching a bit higher, and you want to keep them out of the paint, prevent that penetration. And so I know it's a little confusing, but I hope that clarified it a bit for you. And final question from David Tafoya 72. Top 5 coffee shops in LA. Had to end it on a fun note. My top 5 coffee shops in LA. This is going to be very specific to the areas of LA that I have lived in, which post college went to USC, so was living downtown then. But it's been like the Culver City / Playa area, and then Beverly Grove / West Hollywood area. So I do frequent coffee shops in those areas the most. So I want to preface this with that perspective of I am going to give coffee shops in particular areas that were just more common to me and where I lived and where I'd like to work out of. Number 1 for me all time was this spot called Coffee Connection that does not exist anymore. I think it's a new spot, but it was this old Italian restaurant that they turned into a coffee shop. And what I liked about it was there was an indoor section and then an outdoor section, and then another indoor section. So you could work in multiple spots, even within one session, and get different experiences. And for me, that's something that I enjoy. So sometimes I'd sit outside, sometimes I'd sit inside. They had couches, they had big tables, small tables, just an assortment of setup. The coffee was solid. It was not my favorite spot, but I really liked the setup. There was always space and there was outlets, and it was just a fun place to do work. I believe they're being rebranded. I don't know the name of it. So that was actually more in like Mar Vista area. That's my all-time favorite one. But again, I think they got shut down, and it was just too far for me to keep working out of there. A second one for me would be Verve. I love Verve. There's a couple spots, one near the Grove in Beverly Grove, which is where I live, or there's also one on Melrose. I guess that's more in like the WeHo area. Either one, I prefer the one closer to me on 3rd Street. I love the Nitro Cold Brew, or Nitro Flash Brew, they call it. And then I also really like the internal aesthetic. It's just a nice coffee shop to work at. The outlets can sometimes be a bit of an issue, more so in the Melrose one versus the Beverly one, but it's one of my favorite places to work, and I really like the coffee. Number 3 is Harvey's, which is under a gym. It's also in the general area of Beverly Grove. It's right diagonally across from Swingers, the cafe, and it's right under a gym. And so you'll see people or hear people work it out and stuff. But I think that's another spot that's pretty good to work. They have outlets. That's a big thing. Like I love great coffee, a lot of space, and outlets. So 4 would be this spot on Dante, which is also near Beverly Grove. If you can tell, there's a trend here. I've lived in Beverly Grove for 5 years now, so I tend to frequent that area. On Dante's, it's directly across from Erewhon, and it's a bit of a sleeper in my opinion, where I like the coffee, I like the vibes there. And then 5th would be, this is like the dive bar of LA coffee shops. It is a sleeper unless you're in the Culver area, I think. But this place called Tanner's that's probably the place I've done the most work. It's between there and Coffee Connection, but the 2 spots I've done the most work in my life at coffee shops are probably Coffee Connection and Tanner's, but Tanner's was a local spot in Culver. Key honorable mention here to Series A, which my wife has turned me on to, and I know it's gone viral on TikTok and social media. They have really good coffee there. It's not, for me, it's a tougher place to work because I think it's a bit smaller and it's always packed. And so for that reason, from like, I like a certain amount of space and reliability, and just knowing I could go to a place and I'm going to find a spot to work and I'm going to have like my whole setup. But coffee wise, I really like Series A. So if we're doing coffee rankings, Verve and Series A are close for me among this list. But if we're doing overall coffee shop, it would be Coffee Connection, then Verve, then Harvey's, Andante, and then Tanner's. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. On the road to 50K subscribers by the end of 2025. It would mean the world to me if you hit that subscribe button. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back on Saturday. I will talk to you then.